She had agreed to cover a single shift as a hotel receptionist, never imagining that one guest would walk in and alter the course of her life forever. Under the dim, flickering light of the front desk lamp, Emily's fingers moved nervously over the worn-out keyboard, trying to tame the hotel's outdated reservation system. It was her first time in this role, a last-minute favor for her best friend, Jenna, who had called just 2 hours earlier, her voice trembling with fever as she begged Emily to step in. The place was small, hidden between shuttered storefronts and silent back alleys. Outside, the rain fell harder, turning the night into a curtain of shadows that made the building feel even more isolated. The door chime broke the stillness. Emily's head snapped up. A man stepped in from the storm, tall, broad-shouldered, his black coat glistening with rain. Water trailed down from the edges, dripping onto the floor. His posture was slightly hunched, as though the weight of the weather was nothing compared to the heaviness he carried inside. Dark hair clung to his forehead and his eyes. Those eyes were cold, hollow, as if they hadn't truly seen light in years. She cleared her throat and forced a polite smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" He hesitated, far too long. I'm not sure," he said at last, his voice low, rough, and strangely detached. "I called earlier." Emily nodded, keeping her tone calm. "No problem. What name should I check under?" Another pause. He didn't just look at her, he looked through her, like someone trying to decide whether to speak or vanish. "Graham," he said finally. "Graham Weston." She entered the name, the keys clicking in the otherwise silent room. "Got it. Room 204. One night, king bed. Late checkout." He didn't respond. "Would you like help with anything else?" she asked, handing him the key card. He took it slowly. Their fingers brushed, just a fleeting touch, but he didn't react. No smile, no acknowledgement. "Thank you," he murmured, turning toward the elevator. Halfway there, he stopped. Emily's breath caught. He stood completely still, his back to her. The seconds dragged on. Then, without warning, he turned his head. Just slightly, enough for her to see the sharp edge of his profile, and those same empty, distant eyes meeting hers once more. He stepped into the elevator, the doors slid shut, and just like that, he was gone. Emily exhaled, though the air caught somewhere in her chest. Something about him clung to her thoughts, not in the sharp edge of fear, but in the quiet weight of sorrow, the kind that feels like watching someone drown while you remain helpless on the shore. An hour crept by. The lobby stayed silent, save for the soft patter of rain against the windows and the steady ticking of the wall clock above her. She sat behind the desk, idly flipping through old magazines, her mind half in the present, half still with the man in the black coat. Then she froze. Beyond the glass doors, barely visible through the heavy sheets of rain, was a figure. She rose, slowly leaning closer to the window. No umbrella, no movement, just a man sitting on the cold metal bench in the small balcony garden outside room 204. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't on a phone. He was simply still, drenched through, as if the rain had soaked not just his clothes, but his very being. It was Graham. Emily glanced at the clock. Over an hour had passed since he'd checked in, yet here he was, head bowed, shoulders caving in on themselves. She wanted to step outside, to ask if he was all right. But something held her in place. Not fear, something deeper. A quiet, unshakable instinct telling her this wasn't just a man caught in a storm. This was someone trying, perhaps desperately, to feel something. Anything, a flash of lightning. split the sky. For a brief, blinding second, his silhouette sharpened against the wet stone wall. His hands were clenched together, tight, like a man caught between prayer and despair. Her chest ached. She turned away from the glass, heart pounding, unsure why her throat felt tight. Back at the desk, her eyes fell to the blank notepad by the phone. Slowly, almost without deciding, she tore a small piece from it. She picked up a pen. For a moment, her hand hovered. Then, with a breath she didn't know she was holding, she wrote a single line. Folding the note carefully, she set it in her palm, feeling the weight of its tiny, unspoken message. No one else came through the lobby that night. The rain grew heavier, its rhythm surrounding her like a quiet cage. Emily stayed awake the rest of her shift, even after the manager returned with a tired smile and a murmured thank you. Even after she walked the 12 blocks home with sore feet and damp clothes, her mind would not let go of the man. In room 204, Graham Weston, she repeated his name in her mind, over and over, as if the sound alone might unlock some hidden truth. Graham Weston, the image of him on that balcony, sitting in the cold rain for over an hour without a shiver, would not leave her. It wasn't just sadness she'd seen in his eyes. It was something deeper, emptier, a stillness that didn't speak of peace, but of surrender, as if his body stayed alive only because no one had told it to stop. By the time the clock's hands neared dawn, Emily was still awake. Wrapped in a worn blanket on the edge of her narrow bed, she listened to the faint hum of her apartment, the distant rush of traffic, the low murmur of a neighbor's television through thin walls. Her knees were drawn tightly to her chest, her thoughts looping in restless circles. She knew that look. She had seen it before, not in someone else, but staring back at her in her own reflection. In moments when the weight of life felt almost too much to bear, her hand reached for the battered spiral notebook on the nightstand. It was usually filled with the mundane, grocery lists, rent reminders, scribbled work shifts. She flipped to a blank page, the pen hovering above it. What could she possibly write to a man she didn't know? Something that wouldn't sound hollow or naive. She didn't overthink. She let her hand move. Her heart spoke faster than her mind. If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think. No name, no explanation, just truth. The kind she, too, sometimes needed to hear. Before the sun rose, Emily found herself back at the hotel. She told the night receptionist she'd forgotten her phone charger in the break room. No questions asked, room 204 was still occupied. A thin strip of warm light glowed beneath the door. Emily crouched down, folded the note in half, and slid it under with a trembling finger. Her heart pounded, each beat loud in her ears. For a moment, she stayed there, eyes fixed on the brass numbers on the door. Then she stood, turned, and walked away. The next morning, her life returned to its routine. But Graham was gone, checked out before sunrise. No message, no note, no trace. His room was empty, his name crossed off the ledger. When Emily asked Jenna at the front desk if he'd said anything, Jenna just shrugged. Nothing, handed me the key and walked out. Didn't even ask for a receipt. Something unfamiliar settled in Emily's chest. Not sadness exactly, more like the hollow ache of waiting for an answer that would never come. She told herself it was foolish. He was a stranger, a man she had met only once. It was silly to expect a sign, a thank you, even a smile. Still, some small part of her had hoped for something, a word, a sign. Instead, all she received was silence. Days blurred together as she returned to the chaos of her life. Bookstore shifts in the mornings, cafe work in the evenings, study hours crammed into the spaces between. Her bank balance kept shrinking, her tuition bill loomed larger, and her college advisor's warning echoed in her mind. Without payment, her enrollment could be suspended. The pressure pressed in from every side. She tried to forget room 204, but sometimes, late at night, while she closed the cafe alone, wiping down counters to the hum of the floor fan, she would see him again in her mind, the rain-soaked figure on the balcony, the eyes like doorways leading nowhere. And she would wonder, not constantly, but in sudden, quiet flashes, did that note matter? Did he even read it? Was he all right? She would never know, but somewhere, deep inside, she hoped desperately, silently, that those 12 words had been enough to hold someone in place, just long enough to keep them from stepping too far over the edge. 2 months passed since that rainy night. Emily had folded the memory of Graham Weston into a corner of her mind, filed between fleeting curiosity and silent hope. Life hadn't lightened. If anything, it had grown heavier. Tuition fees piled up. The cafe extended her hours. The bookstore cut her shifts entirely. So when she opened her email one morning and saw a subject line that read, "Employment Opportunity, Assistant to Executive Director," she almost deleted it. She assumed it was spam. But then she noticed her name was spelled perfectly. The message referenced a personal recommendation, and the sender was from a major health tech company, Ethereum, a name she recognized faintly from news articles. She read the email again, and again, and again. She had never applied for this job. A contact number was listed at the bottom. With trembling fingers, she dialed it, expecting to hear an automated message. "Good morning, this is Catherine from Ethereum," a bright, professional voice answered. "Is this Miss Emily Clark?" "Yes," Emily managed. "We're delighted. You received our message. We'd like to invite you for an in-person meeting with our executive director regarding the assistant position." "I think there's been a mistake," Emily said. "I never applied." There was a brief pause on the line. "Actually, you were referred by someone who requested to remain anonymous for now." Emily agreed to the meeting, her heart thrumming with a mix of unease and something dangerously close to excitement. 3 days later, she stood before Ethereum's glass and steel headquarters, wearing her best second-hand blazer and the only pair of heels she owned. The lobby was all polished marble and light, every footstep echoing in the vast space. An assistant greeted her, then led her to the top floor. "Please wait here," they said, leaving her in a quiet, immaculate reception area outside the executive director's office. The assistant gestured toward a door. Emily stepped inside. The office was bathed in golden, daylight spilling from towering windows that stretched to the ceiling. Sleek, modern lines framed the space, glass, steel, and a black walnut desk that anchored the room at the far end. A man in a tailored suit stood with his back to her, gazing out over the city skyline. He turned. Emily froze. It was him, Graham, but not the man from room 204. This Graham stood tall, shoulders squared, clean-shaven, hair neatly styled. His eyes still held depth, but now they were alive. He smiled, a quiet, steady smile. "Hello, Emily." Her breath caught. You work here. I run it," he said. "Ethereum has been mine from the start. I've only just returned." Her mind scrambled for words. I don't understand." He stepped forward, reaching into his jacket. When his hand emerged, it held a small, folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, water-stained, but unmistakable, her handwriting. "If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think." "I kept it," he said softly. "I read it 3 times that morning, and then I got up, packed my bag, and checked out. Not because I felt better, but because I realized someone out there believed I might be worth saving." Emily's chest tightened as she stared at the note in his hand. "I had planned." His voice faltered. "I had planned to end everything that night. I wasn't in pain, I was numb. I believed nothing mattered. But that line you wrote," he met her eyes, his voice trembling just slightly. It interrupted the silence in my head. It was the first voice that didn't sound like judgment or shame, it was hope. Emily swallowed hard, her throat burning. "I didn't know, I was scared. You looked like someone who needed to hear something real." "You were right," Graham said, "and I needed, more than anything, to hear that I wasn't invisible." A silence settled between them, heavy, unshakable, sacred. Then he spoke again. "I asked the hotel staff for your name. I didn't want to intrude, so I waited until I had something real to offer." He gestured toward the desk. "This position is yours, if you want it. Not as charity, not as repayment, but because I believe you belong somewhere. Your voice will matter." Emily looked at him, really looked. He was still the man from that rainy night. But he was also something more, and, somehow, so was she. Working beside Graham became the most unexpected routine of her life. Each morning, she walked into the towering Etherean building each morning with quiet determination, and left each evening with the strange sensation that she'd been living in someone else's story. But it wasn't a dream, it was real, and it was hers. Graham, now fully back in his role as CEO, was nothing like the cold, distant executives she'd once imagined. He carried himself with composure, but beneath that calm was something warmer, something that revealed itself in quiet, unspoken ways. At exactly 3 p.m. every afternoon, a cup of chamomile tea would appear on her desk, because he remembered her saying she avoided caffeine. On rainy days, he was already at the front doors before she left, umbrella in hand, holding it over her without a word, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And every time she completed a small task, a perfectly organized file, a last-minute meeting arranged without a hitch, he would give a small, approving smile and say, "Thank you, brave one." At first, she assumed it was just a nod to the note she had once slipped under his door. But as the weeks passed, the way he said it began to feel different, less like a reference to the past, and more like a truth he saw in her. Every time those words reached her, she found herself standing just a little taller. They developed an easy rhythm. One evening, he invited her to a tiny street food cart tucked between 2 old buildings, famous for having the best grilled corn in the city. She laughed when he tried to eat without getting chili powder on his shirt and failed miserably. He laughed too, a full, unguarded laugh that she had never heard in the rain. On other nights, they lingered in the company's small employee library, helping the volunteer staff reshelve books. Graham never made an announcement about being there. He simply rolled up his sleeves and started sorting, arranging biographies by spine color instead of by author name, grinning like a mischievous child when corrected. One night, as they walked out, they passed the building's older security guard, who was struggling to walk with the sole of his shoe flapping loose. Without hesitation, Graham knelt down, pulled a roll of strong tape from his briefcase, and bound the shoe tightly. "That'll hold for a few days," he said gently, patting the man's shoulder before standing. Emily watched, her chest tightening. It wasn't about image or status or performance. It was simply who he was, someone who noticed the unnoticed, someone who remembered what it felt like to be unseen. And maybe that was why he noticed her, because, in some way, they recognized each other. They began to talk more, not just about deadlines and schedules, but about memories, childhood, fears, the dreams they had before life pushed them into survival mode. And yet, there was always a line. Neither of them crossed it. It lingered there, unspoken but present in the spaces between chairs during meetings, in the pauses between jokes, in the soft silences that followed their laughter. They never mentioned it. They didn't need to. Both of them felt it. One evening, they were in the company's side garden, a narrow strip of green between two buildings, with two worn benches and a single cherry tree. The air was cool, the petals trembling in a faint breeze. Emily's voice broke the quiet. "I used to sell bottled water in movie theaters." Graham's brow lifted slightly. "I wore a uniform 3 sizes too big. My shoes squeaked with every step. I dropped a full tray once and cried in the break room for an hour." He said nothing, letting the moment breathe. "I never finished." "College," she added, eyes fixed on her hands. "Couldn't afford it. Most days, I don't even know half the jargon people use here. I Google things when I get home. I rehearse answers before meetings." "You're doing more than fine," Graham said, his voice steady, low. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I don't belong in a place like this. Not really." Her voice softened further. "I'm just a girl who once sold water at the movies. I don't belong in your world." Graham turned toward her fully, his gaze steady. It wasn't pity she saw, it was something deeper, more deliberate. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped. Instead, he reached into his pocket, the same note, folded neatly, worn at the edges, still carrying the faint marks of rain. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Emily wasn't sure if she felt comforted or quietly terrified at how deeply this man could see her. It was late, long past office hours. The building had fallen into a soft hush. Outside the window, the city glowed under a settling dusk. They sat across from each other in the small break room, half-empty mugs of tea cooling between them. Graham looked tired, but not the kind of tired that came from back-to-back meetings or a flood of emails. This was different. A weariness that came from somewhere far deeper. "I owe you a story," he said at last, his eyes fixed on the slow swirl of tea in his cup. Emily tilted her head. "Listening, you know I'm the CEO," he said quietly. "But you don't know why I wasn't here. Until recently." She nodded slowly. She had wondered before about the unexplained gap in his career, the whispers in the hallways, the half-finished sentences in articles she'd found online. Graham leaned back, the lamplight catching the sharp planes of his face. 6 months ago, he began a device my company developed, an advanced implant for post-surgical monitoring. Malfunctioned during a routine operation. The patient died on the table. Emily's breath caught. "It wasn't our core technology," he continued. "It was a defect in a third-party component. Something we should have caught, but didn't. Not in time." He paused, the memory heavy in his voice. The media didn't care about nuance. Headlines screamed tech CEO plays God with human lives, Ethereum's gamble turns fatal. I became the face of greed, of arrogance, of reckless ambition. His jaw tightened. Investors fled. Our stock collapsed overnight. I stepped down, trying to protect what little integrity the company still had. Emily sat in silence, but his voice didn't soften. That wasn't the worst part, he said. He leaned forward slightly, eyes darker now. The brother of the man who died found me, waited outside the courthouse. He didn't yell, he didn't curse. He just looked me in the eye and said, "Graham's." Voice lowered to a whisper. "I hope you live long enough to feel the guilt." "I do, every day." The words hung between them like a weight. Neither could move. That night, Graham went on, was the first night I didn't sleep at all. The guilt, it ate through me like acid. Not because I pulled the trigger, but because I built the gun, and people trusted me with it. He looked down at his hands. I started drifting, walking through days like they weren't real. I stopped. Answering calls, I couldn't touch a prototype without shaking. I told myself I was a disease in the shape of a man. Everything I created hurt someone. Emily's eyes burned, and then Graham said, his mouth tugging into the faintest smile. I checked into a small hotel. No luggage, no return ticket. I didn't plan to check out. Her heart thudded in her chest. But under the door, he reached into his wallet and pulled out the worn, rain-marked note. This was waiting for me. He handed it to her. She took it, her fingers trembling. "If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think." I read it. Then I read it again, 10 times. I cried for the first time in weeks, and then I ordered breakfast. His voice steadied. That day, I decided to stop hiding. I hired independent investigators, forced open sealed reports, reran every test. It took 3 months, but the truth came out. It wasn't our tech. It wasn't my team. It was a flaw in one supplier's code, buried under 10 layers of subcontracting. Emily stayed silent. "I didn't sue," he said finally. "I didn't make an announcement." She had tried to walk like she belonged, speak like she belonged. The room shimmered with soft laughter, the clink of glasses, the low hum of practiced charm. She caught snippets of conversations, funding rounds, strategic pivots, emerging markets, words that still felt like polished stones in her mouth. She smiled where she was supposed to, nodded at names she might forget by morning. But beneath, the warmth of the chandeliers, her pulse beat a little too fast. Halfway through the evening, she slipped out onto the balcony, the air cool against her skin. The city stretched beneath her, glittering and endless. A voice came from behind, too loud in that she turned to find Graham leaning against the railing. Tie slightly loosened, eyes tired but steady. She tried to smile, just needed a second. He stepped beside her, silent for a long moment. Then, softly, you walk into a room like you're bracing for impact. Her breath caught. She looked down, fingers curling on the railing. I don't want to make a mistake, say the wrong thing, remind everyone that I'm not." She stopped. Not what? She hesitated, then forced the words out. "Not like them." Graham's gaze didn't waver. "Emily, you don't have to be like them. You have to be you. That's why you're here." Her throat tightened. "You say that like it's simple. It's not." His voice was quiet, certain, "but it's worth it." For a heartbeat, neither moved. The city wind wrapped around them, carrying the faint scent of rain. And for the first time that evening, she let herself breathe. She had just begun to believe she belonged in till the whisper came, near the desert table. Two colleagues stood with the easy confidence of people who had never once bothered to say her name. Perfect suits, practiced smiles. One of them glanced in her direction, smirking. "Nice of the CEO to bring his assistant," he said, his voice smooth but edged like glass. The other gave a low chuckle. "Well, when someone saves your life, I guess it buys them a seat at the table. Or maybe," his eyes narrowed slightly, "she's just very persuasive." Emily's breath caught. The words slid under her skin like cold steel. She didn't turn, didn't speak. Instead, she walked away slow, deliberate steps, while their laughter clung to her like smoke. Outside, the night air hit sharp and cold, the stars far too still. Something deep inside her twisted. Back in the ballroom, Graham was still mid-conversation with the guest speaker. Whether he noticed her absence or simply gave her space, she couldn't tell. It didn't matter. She returned only long enough to place a small folded note on his plate, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. Then she left. It read, "You saved me from despair, but now I need to save myself from forgetting who I am." She didn't go home. She walked for hours through streets that felt like fragments of another lifetime past, small shops with dim neon signs, past stalls where the air was thick with the scent of spice and old wood. These were places where no one knew her, yet every corner whispered of the girl she used to be. Emily wasn't angry. She was afraid. Afraid that her worth was starting to feel measured by the gentleness of someone else's world. Afraid that every kindness Graham offered, though real, though beautiful, might be stitching her into a life she had not yet earned. She needed distance, not to escape him, but to find herself without leaning on the man who had once made her feel seen. Because if this feeling in her chest, this quiet, undeniable truth was love, then it had to grow between two whole people, not one reaching up while the other reached down. She owed that to herself, and to him. The following Monday, she placed a sealed envelope on Graham's desk before the office filled with voices. It wasn't a resignation. It was something quieter, an indefinite leave of absence, typed neatly and signed without flourish. She didn't wait to see his face, didn't linger for his approval. The letter spoke for her. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for helping me begin. But now I have to walk this next part of the road alone." Beside it, she left her badge. The lanyard was coiled neatly, like a ribbon on a gift, and then she walked away. She walked out through the glass doors without a goodbye only, the steady rhythm of her footsteps echoing behind her. Somehow, she knew he would understand. That evening, in the soft glow of her kitchen's single lamp, Emily sat at her small table and clicked enroll. Night classes, business communications, digital literacy, non-profit management. Her schedule became a blueprint carved from sacrifice tutoring children from 8 a.m. until noon, freelance data entry through the afternoon, then racing across the city to attend classes until the clock bled past 10. Her new apartment was a single room. No elevator, no balcony, but every bill was hers to pay. Every chair, every mug, every quiet moment at the end of the day belonged to her alone. There were no gifts from Graham now, no favors whispered into existence. He had offered gently an introduction here, a scholarship there, but she declined. Not from pride, but from something sharper. She didn't want to be assembled from another person's kindness. She wanted to return to him, not as a rescued girl, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself from the inside out. He never pressed, yet his presence lingered like a steady light in the distance. They messaged not daily, but often enough. Not love, letters, but fragments of truth. Had to give a 5-minute pitch today. Didn't faint. Tried that ramen place. 7/10. More garlic next time. Found a word that means healing in progress. Will send later. It was strange, this closeness while apart. It wasn't romance in the way most would name it, but something quieter, steadier. Between exhaustion and small victories, Emily realized she was no longer merely surviving. She was living each rent check she signed, each child who read a paragraph without stumbling. Each night she closed her eyes, knowing she had chosen her own path. These were threads stitching together a life of her own design, and still, on certain nights, when the city's hum faded and her textbooks lay closed, she would take out her journal. Her favorite entry was written under the murmur of midnight rain. He waited at the edge of my storm, not to pull me out, but to hold the umbrella in case I ever turned back. If he's still there when I find my center, we'll begin again. Not from chapter 1, but from chapter 2, as to whole people who choose each other. 2 years passed. Emily stood before a packed auditorium, the heat of the stage lights soft against her skin, the microphone steady in her hand. Her hair, now longer, was swept back into a simple twist. The navy dress she wore had once belonged to her mother. She didn't need a teleprompter. Her voice, once hesitant, a whisper half swallowed now, moved through the room with clarity and quiet strength. She had grown into her story, not just the version others told about her, but the one she had learned to tell herself. Tonight, she was being honored for her work with a non-profit dedicated to providing literacy programs and healthcare access for women who had been overlooked for far too long. What began in a single borrowed classroom with 2 students and a handful of donated books had become a network that reached across the state. Hundreds of women mothers, survivors, daughters now, wrote their own names with pride, read medical instructions without fear, and asked questions with a voice that could not be dismissed. The standing ovation rose like a wave, warm and relentless. Emily's eyes moved over the faces in the crowd, students who had become teachers, doctors who once doubted her, now meeting her gaze with respect. Yet, in the middle of the applause, her heart caught not from nerves, but from the unshakable sense that something or someone was missing. When the speeches ended and the lights dimmed, she stepped into the crowd. There were handshakes and embraces, laughter and tears, the shared language of people who had fought for better days. And then she saw him. He stood in the back row, away from the cameras and the noise. Graham, don't know flowers, no announcement, number. Front row seat, just him, tall, composed, dressed in quiet grey, with a touch of silver now at his temples. The years had left their trace, but his presence was exactly as she remembered, steady, unshaken. Their eyes met across the room, and in that instant the noise, the lights, the swirl of movement, all of it blurred into nothing. Later, they walked together by the riverside, the same river where, 2 years before, Emily had wandered alone on a storm-laced night, her thoughts restless and uncertain. Tonight, the air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. Street lamps spilled gold across the water's surface, rippling like old memories returning home. I never expected to see you here, Emily said, her voice softer now. I never stopped following your work, Graham replied, calm but certain. She glanced at him, a quiet smile touching her lips. You never said a word. I didn't need to, he answered. You were already speaking through everything you built. They stopped beside a weathered bench, its wood cool beneath her fingertips. Emily looked at him, her eyes searching. Do you still have it? She asked. Graham reached for his wallet slowly, deliberately, like a man retrieving something too important to rush. From its folds, he drew out a worn, water-stained slip of paper, edges curled with time. It was the same note she had once slid beneath his hotel room door, back when neither of them knew if tomorrow would come. If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think. Emily's breath caught. You kept it. All my life, he said quietly, his gaze steady on hers. Because it gave mine back to me. There was no proposal, no grand declaration, only the weight of the moment. As he took her hand, fingers warm against hers, and leaned forward to press a kiss to her forehead, it was not a promise of forever, but the acknowledgement of loved lives that had met, not through luck or rescue, but through purpose, in the weeks that followed. Graham returned to his foundation work, guiding young innovators not only in technology, but in ethics, compassion, and integrity. Emily expanded her programs into rural towns, bringing literacy and healthcare to young mothers who had never dared to dream of more. They didn't move in together. They didn't need to. Yet, some nights, at the quiet end of a long day, a single message would appear on their screens. Today I am still alive, so I guess I am still braver than I think. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you that kindness can be a turning point, that second chances can be quiet, steady, and real pause for a moment. Remember that sometimes the smallest words can save a life. Healing often comes not in grand gestures, but in a folded note, a shared silence, or the simple act of showing up. If you believe in the power of stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of what truly matters, join us for more journeys like this one. Subscribe to soul-stirring stories for tales of resilience, love, and hope that stay with you long after the screen fades to black dot. And if you're reading this, if you are still here, know this: you are already braver than you think. Music